The IV machine ticked in the quiet ER on a Thursday evening when my screen lit up. It was my younger sister, smiling from my couch, holding a glass of wine. The caption, "Finally, peace without the drama queen." I was attached to monitors, my body failing after working double shifts to feed them, but her cruel post was merely a smokescreen. While I worked myself to death to pay their bills, my father was committing federal fraud. He had stolen my 8-year-old daughter's identity, racked up $53,000 of secret debt, and filed a petition to strip my legal rights by declaring me insane. They mistook my physical exhaustion for permanent weakness. They assumed a broken nurse couldn't defend herself. What they failed to realize is that a mother protecting her child doesn't just survive a betrayal, she destroys it. I systematically dismantled their entire trap, and a year later they were the ones begging for a place to live. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. And if you want, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. My name is Diana. I'm 34. I'm a night shift nurse and a single mom to an 8-year-old named Layla. And this is what happened when I stopped being the person everyone could take from. Now, let me take you back to a Thursday evening in November. The exact night my body finally gave out, the hallway at Riverdale County Hospital smelled like it always did. A harsh mix of bitter floor wax and stale coffee. I was 15 hours into a shift that was only supposed to be 12. Clara, the other night nurse, had called out sick. So, I stayed. I always stayed. Because that's who I was, the reliable one. The one who carried the weight. My hands had started shaking around hour 12. It wasn't the kind of shaking you instantly notice. It was the kind you desperately try to hide. Hold it together. Just a little longer, I told myself. I pressed my sweating palms flat against the cold metal of the med cart. I gripped my pen until my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to breathe through the deep rattling tremor in my chest, and I charted one more patient. By hour 14, the harsh fluorescent lights had thick, glowing halos around them. My vision swam at the edges. I lied to myself. It's just the lighting. You're fine. By hour 15, I was walking down the west corridor with a heavy stack of intake forms. My knees buckled first. They just turned to water. Then, the hard tile floor came up fast. I don't remember hitting the ground. I just remember the awful sound. Forms scattering everywhere like dead leaves. A rubber shoe squeaking sharply. Someone screaming my name. Then, I was staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them to stay awake. 1, 2, 3, 4. The heavy plastic of an oxygen mask being strapped to my face. Severe dehydration. Chronic fatigue collapse. That's what the ER doctor scribbled on my chart. They wanted to keep me overnight for IV fluids. I didn't argue. I couldn't. Lying alone in that freezing hospital bed, I stared at my phone. The emergency contact protocol had kicked in. They'd called my father, George. No answer. They'd called my mother, Pamela. Voicemail. My heart ached. I thought about my 8-year-old daughter, Layla, asleep at home. My mother usually watched her on my night shifts, but no one had bothered to call me back to confirm she was safe. My fingers trembled as I reached to text my mother. That's when I saw the Facebook notification. Daphne Michelle Prescott, my younger sister, 29 years old. The post was timestamped 45 minutes after the hospital had called our parents. The photo was a bright selfie. Daphne lounging comfortably on the living room couch. My couch, in my house, holding a glass of red wine. My wine, full smile. No filter needed when you're that pleased with yourself. The caption read, "Finally, a day without the drama queen." 52 likes. I slowly scrolled through them, my chest tightening. Names I recognized. Kathy from the prayer group, Mark from the hardware store, Joyce, my mother's walking partner. People who knew me. One comment jumped out. Barbara Harrington, who lived 3 streets over. Is she being dramatic again? Daphne's reply was instant. You have no idea. I couldn't stop scrolling. 4 laughing face reactions sat at the very top. I tapped the screen to see who they were. The 4th one was my mother, Pamela. She had left a laughing emoji while her oldest daughter lay in a hospital bed entirely alone. I set the phone face down on the scratchy blanket. I didn't cry. I just looked at the ceiling tiles. This wasn't new. That's the part that sat the heaviest on my chest. Every time I got sick, every time I asked for help, every time my body broke under the massive weight I carried, the word was always exactly the same. Dramatic. The first time I collapsed 3 years ago, my father didn't even come upstairs. He shouted it from the kitchen. "Nurses don't collapse, you just want attention." I picked my phone back up and took a screenshot. I don't know why. Pure instinct, maybe. Or maybe some deep hidden part of my soul knew I'd need the proof. Because that cruel post was just the surface wound. The real damage was hiding in places I hadn't even thought to look yet. And it was about to rip my entire life apart. They discharged me the next morning at 8:30 sharp. I drove myself home because there was no one else to call. The 40-minute drive on Highway 7 felt like a lifetime. I kept the window cracked, letting the sharp, wet November air whip across my face just to stay upright. The car heater made my head spin, but the freezing wind was a harsh reminder that I was still awake. I pulled into the cracked driveway of 514 Meadow Lane. This was the house my grandmother Hazel had left me 14 years ago. A modest, 3-bedroom Cape Cod with a leaning mailbox and a porch that desperately needed a fresh coat of paint. But the deed filed downtown held only one name: Diana Marie Prescott. Sole owner. Fee simple absolute. On paper it was my sanctuary. In reality it was a trap. I pushed through the heavy front door. George sat glued to his recliner, the morning talk show blaring. He glanced up, then his eyes flicked right back to the glowing screen. "You look fine," he muttered, waving a hand. "Don't make a thing out of it." In the narrow kitchen, my mother stood at the stove, slowly stirring oatmeal. She didn't even turn around to look at my face. "There's coffee if you want it." Daphne was curled on the sofa, aggressively scrolling through her phone, not a single glance in my direction. I stood frozen in the hallway of my own home and counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. I just waited. Someone ask. "Just one of you please ask if I'm okay." 4 seconds. 6. Nobody asked. Nobody cared. The silence was deafening. I swallowed the tight lump in my throat and forced my heavy legs up the stairs. Layla was sitting on her small bed, already dressed for school with her purple backpack strapped on. The moment she saw me, she threw her tiny arms around my waist. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Grandpa said you were just tired." My heart shattered. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding her tight against my chest. "I'm okay, baby," I lied softly. "Let me change, and I'll take you." I held her for a long time, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. Then I sat her down and looked around her bedroom, her safe space in the house my grandmother gifted me. The house where my parents and sister lived completely rent-free because I naively believed that's what family meant. Standing in that hallway, I felt like an unwanted ghost in my own home. On my way out, I noticed a crisp white envelope sitting on the kitchen table. The return address caught my eye: the county courthouse. It was addressed to George. I didn't touch it. It wasn't my mail, but the image of that official seal burned into my memory. What is he doing with the court? I wouldn't find out until later, and when I did, it would shift the ground beneath my feet forever. 2 agonizing weeks later, I dragged myself back to work on reduced hours. My body was slowly knitting itself back together, but my mind was a fog of exhaustion. During a break, Janice, the hospital's billing coordinator, handed me some insurance paperwork. "Just check your credit report to make sure everything is current, honey," she suggested kindly. "Just in case there are any weird liens or medical claims." I had never checked my credit report, not once in 34 years. I had 0 credit card debt. I owned my car and my house outright. There was nothing to hide, or so I foolishly thought. That evening I sat in my freezing car in the hospital parking lot, my laptop balanced precariously on the steering wheel. The streetlights flickered above as I logged onto the website and pulled the data from all 3 bureaus. The big, bold number hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Credit score 540. No, that's impossible. I paid every bill early. I had never missed a single payment in my life. My breathing hitched as I scrolled down. Then, I saw them, 3 separate credit card accounts I had never opened. One had a $24,000 balance, another had $16,500, the third sat at $12,500. Total debt, $53,000. All opened within the last 4 years. Minimum payments had been made for a few months, then nothing. Delinquent. Sent to aggressive collections agencies. How had I never seen a single warning letter? I later discovered George had opened a secret P.O. box in town, registering everything under a fake email address. Not a single paper trail ever reached our mailbox. My hands were violently shaking again, But this time it wasn't from fatigue. It was pure icy terror. I dialed the number listed for Fidelity United Bank. Richard Barnes, a senior credit analyst at the local Riverdale branch, answered. I frantically verified my identity. Date of birth, social security, mother's maiden name. Ma'am, Richard paused, his voice heavy with pity. The applications were submitted using your exact social security number. The billing address on all three is your home address. But that's impossible, I stammered, tears stinging my eyes. Don't you need physical ID verification for amounts this high? Richard sighed heavily. These weren't standard online applications, Miss Prescott. They were pushed through internally by Marcus Vance. He used to be a loan officer at this branch before he was fired last month for compliance violations. He's listed as the originator on all your accounts. Marcus Vance. The name echoed in my skull. George's weekly poker buddy, the man who sat in my living room, drinking my beer, laughing loudly on Friday nights. They had colluded. They had bypassed the entire banking system together, but as Richard kept talking, I realized the $53,000 debt was just a distraction, because George had a much darker plan for my house, and the clock was already ticking down. I knew exactly whose handwriting was on those papers before I even clicked the attachment. Richard had emailed me the scanned credit card applications while I sat shivering in the parking lot of a Wendy's. I couldn't bear to go home yet. I couldn't breathe the same air as the people living in my house. The cold blue light of my laptop screen illuminated the dark car as the heavy file finally loaded. There it was. The signature on the very first page leaned hard to the right. The capital P in Prescott had that distinct tiny curl at the very top, a messy habit my father had never bothered to break. I had watched him sign colorful birthday cards, crinkled school permission slips, and crisp church donation envelopes with that exact same hand for 35 years. George Raymond Prescott. He hadn't even tried to disguise his writing, he just scribbled his own name on my life, completely assuming I was too blind, or too busy working, to ever look. And ma'am? Richard's voice dropped an octave over the phone, breaking through my shock. There's something else you need to know. A pending home equity line of credit application sits on your property. For $100,000. My lungs stopped working. What? It requires the homeowner's signature in person, so it's stalled right now, Richard explained gently. But the paperwork expires in exactly 7 days. 7 days. He wasn't just ruining my credit score. He was trying to drain the actual equity out of my house, the only safety net I had for my daughter. I sat in that dark parking lot for 15 agonizing minutes. Engine off. Screen glowing. $53,000. That was almost 3 entire years of my take-home pay after taxes. Money I never borrowed. Money I never spent on myself or my child. Money that was now destroying my future while I worked back-to-back double shifts just to keep the lights on. And the whole time, my family treated my home like it was theirs. My mind raced backwards. George had lost his plumbing job 7 long years ago. He claimed his back gave out, filed for disability, and got denied. He was home all day, every day after that. I would regularly see him hunched over his laptop late at night. I naively thought he was reading the news or just doing whatever retired fathers did. Now the sickening truth washed over me. I finally understood what those late nights really were. He was building a mountain of debt in my name. I picked up my phone and dialed Megan Carter. We had been roommates during our senior year of college. She went to law school, and I went to nursing school. Now, she practiced real estate and property law 40 minutes west in Griffin City. We hadn't talked in months, but I didn't waste a single second on small talk. Megan, I need help, I gasped, my voice cracking. I think my father stole my identity. She was dead quiet for 3 long seconds. Her lawyer brain was already working. Then do not confront him. Don't mention a single word of it, she commanded sharply. Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring absolutely everything. Before she hung up, her tone shifted. It grew darker, heavier. Diana, check your daughter's credit too. I completely froze. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. That night, I paced the hallway until Layla was deeply asleep. I tiptoed into her room, tucked the soft blanket carefully around her small shoulders, and closed her door halfway, just the way she liked it. Then, I rushed to my bedroom. Checking a minor's credit isn't like pulling your own report. You have to jump through hoops. You have to contact each bureau directly with the child's social security number, a birth certificate, and your own parent ID. I started the tedious process online, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. One bureau returned a result within the hour. A credit card had been opened 8 months ago in the name of Layla Marie Prescott. Current balance, $1,500. I closed the laptop so slowly I thought the hinges might snap. I set it on the nightstand and stared blankly down the dark hall toward Layla's door. She was 8 years old. She could barely write her own name in cursive. And someone had used her social security number, a 9-digit code I kept hidden inside a locked metal file box in my bedroom closet, to open a line of credit. I scrambled off the bed and practically tore my closet apart. The metal box was still tucked in the back corner. The lock looked completely intact, but when I popped it open, my stomach dropped into my shoes. There were glaring gaps in the thick stack of papers. My original birth certificate was gone. My old social security card was gone. Layla's card was still sitting there, but someone had clearly handled the manila folder recently. The edges were bent. The papers were completely out of order. My own father had crept into my bedroom like a thief in the night. And just as the sheer horror of that violation hit me, harsh headlights flashed across my bedroom wall, and a car door slammed violently in the driveway. Suddenly, harsh yellow headlights slashed across my bedroom wall. A car door slammed loudly in the driveway below. George was home early from his poker game. My heart hammered so violently against my ribs I thought it might crack them. The metal file box was sitting wide open right on my bed, the tiny lock clearly picked. I heard his heavy work boots hitting the wooden stairs. Thud, thud, thud. He was coming up. If he saw me awake with that box, if he figured out I knew the truth before his 7-day clock ran out, he could force his twisted plan immediately. Panic fueled my movements. I shoved the scattered papers inside, snapped the broken lock shut, and kicked the metal container hard under my bed. I threw myself under the heavy quilt just as my bedroom door creaked slowly open. I held my breath. I squeezed my eyes tightly shut, forcing my trembling chest to rise and fall in the slow, steady rhythm of deep sleep. He stood completely still in the doorway for what felt like an eternity. I could smell the sour, stale cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Was he going to step closer? Was he checking to see if I was actually unconscious? Finally, the door clicked shut. I lay frozen in the pitch black, my pulse roaring like a freight train in my ears. A cold, hard truth settled over me in that dark room. You can steal from me. You can call me dramatic. You can mock me on the internet while I am hooked up to machines in an emergency room. But you do not touch my child. That is the ultimate line. There is absolutely no second chance after that line is crossed. The frightened daughter inside me died in that moment, and a fierce, terrifyingly calm mother took her place. I didn't sneak downstairs. I didn't scream. Instead, I sat up on the edge of my mattress and made a meticulous list in the dark. Credit reports, property deed, Layla's birth certificate, forged signatures, everything Megan needed to save us, and that mysterious white envelope from the county court. I still hadn't found out what was inside it. Megan's office sat above a quiet dry cleaner on State Street. It was a humble small-town setup, but the brilliant woman sitting behind the heavy oak desk was a force of nature. She read through my massive pile of paperwork in absolute silence, her sharp blue pen scratching quick notes in the margins. "This is textbook familial identity theft," she stated flatly, looking up at me. "It is a severe federal crime. All 3 applications utilized your exact social, your home address, and a poorly forged signature." I swallowed hard, reaching for my phone. I pulled up the blurry photo I had taken of the courthouse envelope resting on George's kitchen table. I slid the screen toward her. "You didn't open this?" she asked, studying the official return address. "It wasn't my mail," I whispered. "Smart," she nodded. Megan turned swiftly to her computer monitor and pulled up the county court's public docket. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in my name. She scrolled down. Then, she stopped completely. I watched her steady face change. Megan was never emotional, but her jaw tightened by a fraction of an inch. A silent alarm bell rang in my head. "Diana." She rotated the flat screen toward me. "Your father filed a petition for guardianship over you exactly 3 weeks ago." I leaned forward, reading the cold, legal text. "Petition for guardianship of Diana Marie Prescott, filed by George R. Prescott." My eyes dropped to the stated reason. Respondent has a documented history of severe medical episodes consistent with diminished mental capacity. Under the section for supporting witnesses, there was only one single name listed: Daphne Prescott. The breath left my lungs. The petition was officially filed just 4 days after my latest hospital collapse. 4 days. They hadn't been worried about my health. They had been eagerly waiting for my body to fail, so they would have fresh, believable paperwork for a judge. But he has zero medical proof. I gasped, gripping the edge of the desk. I'm just exhausted from working double shifts to feed them. Megan pointed a steady finger to a smaller subfile on the screen. He doesn't need much to file the initial claim. He manipulated Dr. Reed's front desk staff. He requested your old fatigue records, signed for them legally as your emergency contact, and his cheap lawyer spun those basic doctor visits into a fake story about cognitive decline. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a serious, urgent whisper. Diana, the hearing is set for exactly 6 days from now, the exact same day his fake $100,000 loan expires. If he wins, he becomes your legal owner, and he takes everything. If this goes through, Megan said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, your father becomes your legal owner. You will have fewer rights than a child. I sat completely paralyzed in her office. He controls every penny you earn, she continued, laying out the nightmare. He controls your medical decisions. He can legally sell the house. Your house. The home your grandmother left to you. The house where George Prescott had lived rent-free for 14 years. He had slept under my roof while stealing my identity and gambling away $53,000 under my name. And my own sister had eagerly signed a sworn court statement saying I was mentally unfit, the exact same sister who posted a cruel selfie while I was lying hooked to IVs in the ER. Megan strictly told me not to confront him. Play it safe, she warned. But that evening, standing in the dim kitchen of my own home, the air felt incredibly thick and suffocating. I needed to look into his eyes. Not to expose his crimes, but just to see if his mask would slip. I just need to see the monster wearing my father's skin, I thought. George was pouring a fresh cup of coffee, his broad back facing me. The television murmured mindlessly from the living room. Dad, I said, keeping my tone carefully neutral. Have you ever used my social security number for anything? He didn't turn around. His shoulders didn't even flinch. What kind of question is that? A straightforward one. He set the glass pot down on the counter, still facing the wall. No, why would I? I checked my credit today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 agonizing seconds of dead silence stretched across the kitchen. He slowly picked up his favorite ceramic mug, took a calm sip, and finally turned around. His face was completely flat, perfectly practiced. Credit reports have errors all the time, he stated, waving his free hand dismissively. Don't get worked up. 3 cards, I replied smoothly. $53,000. His dark eyes flickered. It was just for a half second, a tiny crack in his armor, but then they steadied into hard glass. I don't know what you're talking about, Diana, and I really don't appreciate the wild accusation. Suddenly, my mother appeared like a ghost in the doorway. She must have been listening from the dark hallway. What's going on in here? She asked nervously. George cut in before I could even open my mouth. She's starting again. Pamela looked at me with that highly specific expression, the exact one she wore whenever she needed me to feel like I was the broken one. Please, Diana, don't do this tonight. We just had a nice dinner. I shifted my gaze to my mother. Did you know? Know what? She deflected, taking a step back. Diana, you're scaring me. Why do you always choose him? I held her avoiding eyes for a long, painful moment. Then I simply nodded. Okay. I turned and walked to the stairs. I was exactly 4 steps up when I heard it. George's voice dropped low into a harsh, urgent hiss directed at Pamela. She's digging. We need to move faster. He didn't know I could hear him, and he definitely didn't know I already knew what terrible finish line they were racing toward. The next morning, the performance continued. I was packing Layla's small lunchbox, a turkey sandwich, apple slices, a juice box, when my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Daphne. I answered. Hey. Her voice was soft, dripping with fake syrupy concern. I heard you were upset about some credit stuff last night. Dad told me. Are you okay? Did he? I asked dryly. Look, everyone's just really worried about you after the whole hospital thing, she pushed, sounding like a bad actress reading a script. Maybe you should take a break. Like, really talk to someone. You mean a therapist to officially prove I'm unstable? A sharp pause. She recovered quickly. I mean someone who can help you cope. Daph, I interrupted, my voice dropping to ice. Did you sign a legal document at the county courthouse 3 weeks ago? The silence this time was deafening. I could actually hear her breathing shift, growing shallow and fast. That was just in case, she stammered defensively. Dad said it was to protect you. Protect me from what? From yourself, Diana. You collapsed at work twice in 4 years. You can't keep going like this. I snapped Layla's lunchbox shut with a loud click. I collapsed because I work 75 hours a week to keep a warm roof over all 4 of you. It's not the family's house. Read the deed, Daff. I hung up. 10 minutes later, as I was slowly backing my car out of the driveway to head to work, my phone buzzed violently against the console. It was Riverdale Elementary. I answered, expecting a nurse calling about a scraped knee. Instead, the principal's tight, anxious voice filled the car. Miss Prescott, your father is here in the front office to pick up Layla. He says there's been a severe family emergency and that you've been hospitalized again. Pure, freezing ice water flooded my veins. No, not her. Do not let him take her, I ordered, my voice cracking like a whip as I slammed the car violently into drive. I am 3 minutes away. Call school security immediately. I ran 3 solid red lights. The tires loudly skidded across the blacktop as I whipped into the school parking lot. I left the engine running, threw open the door, and sprinted blindly through the double glass doors. George was standing right at the front desk, angrily arguing with the frightened secretary. His large hand was reaching out for Layla. My tiny girl looked absolutely terrified, clutching her purple backpack to her chest, pressing her back against the wall. A fierce, primal maternal instinct I didn't even know existed inside me utterly erupted. I shoved past a startled teacher, grabbed Layla tightly by the waist, and pulled her safely behind my legs. What do you think you're doing? I snarled, my whole body shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. George looked quickly around the busy office, instantly playing the embarrassed victim. Diana, calm down, he cooed loudly for the audience. You're being hysterical. I was just helping out. He stepped closer, leaning his head down so only I could hear his vicious whisper. You think you can stop the court hearing? She's coming with me until you settle down and behave. I didn't back away. I leaned into his space, staring dead into his lying eyes. If you ever come within 50 feet of my daughter again, I hissed, every word loaded with poison, I won't bother calling a lawyer. I will completely destroy you. I didn't take Layla home. I couldn't risk him circling back. I drove straight from the elementary school to Megan's quiet office above the dry cleaner. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles violently throbbed. Layla sat frozen in the back seat, hugging her purple backpack against her chest like a protective shield. Are we in trouble, Mama? She whispered, her big eyes wide in the rearview mirror. No, sweetie, I promised, forcing the bravest smile I could muster. We're just going to see a friend. 15 minutes after we settled into Megan's waiting room, my phone vibrated in my pocket. George. I let it ring. When the notification chimed, I pressed the phone to my ear to listen to the voicemail. His voice wasn't yelling. It was tight, rigidly controlled, the exact icy tone he used right before a punishment when I was a kid. You need to stop this nonsense, girl. I'm your father. Everything I've done is for this family. If you push this, you won't have a family left. Then came the real threat, and I already told Pastor Timothy we're having a family meeting this Sunday, to sort this out together the way families do. I saved the audio file. He thought he was intimidating me into silence. He didn't realize he was handing me a loaded weapon. 3 days later, I sat across from Megan's heavy desk. She had my official property deed spread flat next to a fresh title search she'd run overnight. Diana Marie Prescott, sole owner, fee simple absolute, she read aloud. No co-owners, no valid liens, we'll get the fraudulent credit accounts wiped soon. Clean title. I swallowed a hard lump of anxiety. So, I can sell it today if I want? You don't need anyone's permission. The ghost of my childhood guilt crept back in. But they've lived there 14 years. Can they claim squatters' rights? Anything? Megan leaned back in her leather chair. Did they ever pay you a single dime in rent? No. Is there a written lease or verbal agreement? No, I just let them stay. Then legally, Diana, they are simply licensees. You can officially revoke that license with 45 days written notice. Oregon law requires absolutely nothing more. I sat with that heavy realization. 14 years of wide open doors, and legally they had fewer rights to my house than a month-to-month stranger. Megan gave me the number of Linda Dawson, a ruthless realtor in Griffin City. far away from Riverdale's toxic gossip mill. We met at the house the next afternoon. We timed it perfectly while my family was out. George at cards, Pamela at church, Daphne at work. Linda briskly snapped photos and checked the roof. I'd list at $195,000. Good bones, she calculated. I signed the listing agreement right there on the hood of her car. But hold it, I instructed firmly. Do not put it on the market yet. When? She asked. I'll tell you when. The house was ready to go, but I needed one more piece of ammunition before I moved. The next morning, I ruthlessly filed federal identity theft reports online. The CFPB assigned case numbers instantly. I printed them and drove straight to the Riverdale Police Department. Officer David Hayes was at the front desk, late 40s, a calm face that had definitely heard worse betrayals. I slid the credit reports, forged applications, and CFPB numbers across the scratched glass counter. I need to file a criminal report for identity theft. The person who did it is my father. He lives in my house. Hayes nodded once. Have a seat, ma'am. 90 minutes later, every stolen dollar was documented, and I had an official police case number. As I was leaving, a plainclothes detective stepped out of a side office. Detective Miller. He'd been silently listening. Miss Prescott, we'll investigate, but family fraud cases are incredibly messy. Judges hate them. Your father is building a public narrative that you're crazy to get that guardianship. You want to kill that petition dead before it ever hits a courtroom? I nodded slowly. Destroy his character witnesses, Miller said flatly, his eyes hard. He's using his social standing to legitimize taking your assets. He called a church meeting, right? Do it there. Cut off his oxygen. That afternoon, Megan aggressively filed a motion to dismiss the guardianship petition. She attached 2 nuclear weapons. A letter from Dr. Alice Reed, confirming my hospitalizations were purely physical exhaustion, and the official police report establishing George's financial motive. The judge will see this before the hearing, Megan said. It's bulletproof. That night, sitting in the dark, I listened to George's voicemail one more time. We're having a family meeting Sunday. He desperately wanted a massive public meeting. He wanted the church congregation behind him. He wanted 30 respected witnesses to watch his unstable daughter fall apart. Fine, I'd give him his meeting. But George Prescott had absolutely no idea that he wasn't setting a trap for me anymore. He was walking blindfolded into a brutal public execution. Okay, I need to pause here for a second because I know exactly what some of you might be thinking. Why didn't I just confront my father directly and handle this mess privately behind closed doors? Honestly, I tried. You heard that chilling conversation in my kitchen. I looked him dead in the eyes, and he lied without his heart rate even ticking up. My mother desperately pretended she didn't understand what was happening to protect him. My sister told me I needed heavy professional help. The exact same sister who had just signed a sworn court document to have me legally declared incompetent and stripped of my rights. So, let me ask you this. If your own father secretly opened a credit card under your innocent 8-year-old daughter's name, would you politely keep it in the family? Tell me in the comments down below. Now back to the story, because Sunday was finally coming. Sunday arrived cold, bright, and sharp. Riverdale Community Church sat proudly at the dead end of Orchard Drive. It was a classic, white clapboard building with a narrow, reaching steeple, and a loud gravel parking lot that crunched aggressively under every tire. I had been baptized in that water. Layla had been baptized there too. My grandmother Hazel's quiet funeral had been held right in the front wooden pew exactly 14 years ago. After the lengthy morning service ended, George stood up near the folding coffee table in the fellowship hall. He cleared his throat loudly and announced that the Prescott family was hosting a special potluck gathering. Most of the loyal congregation stayed behind. He had been aggressively working the room all week long. I learned this sickening detail later from hushed phone calls and private conversations held after Wednesday prayer group. We're so worried about our Diana. She just hasn't been herself lately. We deeply appreciate your prayers and support. 30 people arranged their squeaky metal folding chairs in a wide, loose circle on the faded linoleum floor. The metal legs scraped harshly against the tile. Above us, the old fluorescent lights hummed with the exact same sickening pitch as the ones in the ER where my nightmare started. I immediately noticed that Pastor Timothy Abbott sat at the very head of the circle. His worn Bible rested heavily on his knee, looking exactly like a man who had reluctantly agreed to referee a brutal match he didn't fully understand. George sat confidently across from him. He wore a sharply pressed Sunday shirt and a serious, heavily practiced expression. The picture-perfect, concerned patriarch. Pamela was seated tightly beside him, her eyes already strategically red. a crumpled tissue clutched in her shaking hand, totally ready for her cue. Daphne sat to their left, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, her jaw locked tight. I walked in quietly with Layla. She was happily carrying a fresh coloring book and a bright new box of crayons. I found 2 empty chairs near the heavy exit door and sat down in the back. 30 pairs of familiar faces slowly turned toward me. Some looked with soft sympathy. Some stared with raw curiosity. A few had that particular knowing look people get when they've already decided what they're seeing before you even speak. George cleared his throat again and stood up slowly. "Thank you all for being here today." His voice was low and somber. "As some of you may know, our dear Diana has been going through a terribly difficult time." He swept his sorrowful gaze across the quiet room. "She's been rushed to the hospital twice now. She's been under a massive amount of stress. Pam and I, well, we're just so worried. We want to make sure she finally gets the serious help she needs." Pamela dabbed her red eyes with the tissue exactly on cue. "We just love her so much," she whimpered loudly. A thick murmur of warm sympathy rippled through the arranged chairs. I watched heads nod in agreement. Gloria Mathis, 72 years old and sitting near the frosty window, pressed a wrinkled hand to her chest. Thomas Benson, late 50s, leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees, fully engaged. The entire room was heavily tilting in George's direction, and he absolutely knew it. He was a master conductor playing an orchestra. He continued, his voice steady, measured, the confident voice of a man who had rehearsed this exact speech in the mirror. "I know this is terribly hard to hear, but Diana has been making some highly irrational decisions lately, wildly accusing family members of horrific crimes." He paused dramatically to let that heavy word land. "She is even threatening to illegally sell the family home out from under us." The collective murmur grew significantly louder. I felt the crushing weight of it pressing against my chest. 30 people actively recalibrating who I was in their minds. Thomas Benson shook his head slowly, clicking his tongue. "Maybe she really does need someone looking out for her, George." George nodded back, grateful, humble, perfectly calibrated. "The county court just needs to know that this strong community sees what we see, that she desperately needs someone to step in and help manage her complex affairs. Just temporarily, of course, until she's better." Daphne uncrossed her arms just long enough to dramatically wipe her perfectly dry eyes. Her expensive mascara didn't run. I noticed that too. I sat completely still. Layla colored happily beside me, drawing a purple house with a massive yellow sun. The soft, rhythmic sound of her waxy crayon on paper was the absolute only honest thing happening in that entire room. Pastor Timothy shifted uncomfortably in his padded chair. He looked hard at George, then turned to look at me in the back. Something deep in his expression was still deeply unsettled. "George," he said carefully, adjusting his glasses, "has Diana actually agreed to this intervention meeting?" George spread his hands wide in innocence. "Well, she's here, isn't she?" Timothy turned his focus directly to me. "Diana, would you like to say anything to the congregation?" I looked up slowly from Layla's bright drawing. 30 pairs of judging eyes, the loud fluorescent hum, the overpowering smell of cheap coffee and vanilla sheet cake. "Yes," I said softly, but firmly. "I would." Before I could even stand up, Daphne cut in loudly. "See?" She turned to the crowded room, throwing her palms up in exasperation. "She's doing it again, making absolutely everything about her." Pamela let out a small, wet sob, noticeably louder than the last one. "I just can't sit here and watch my oldest daughter completely destroy herself." George saw his momentum slipping and aggressively seized it. He turned his broad back to me and faced the circle, dropping his voice to that low, steady, hypnotic register he used when he wanted to sound like the only reasonable adult in the room. "This is exactly what we're talking about, folks. She can't handle basic, adult conversations without getting highly confrontational and aggressive. We're not trying to hurt her. We are desperately trying to help." Loud murmurs of absolute agreement echoed. A sweet woman from the morning prayer group, Kathy Dietrich, reached across the aisle and squeezed Pamela's trembling hand tightly. "You're doing the right thing, Pam. It's so hard." Thomas Benson nodded again, his face grim. "Seems like this breakdown has been building for a long while now." I looked slowly around the crowded room. 30 people who had known my face my entire life. People who had actively watched me grow up in the aisles of this very church. And right now, they were looking at me the exact way you look at someone who is totally losing their grip on reality, with deep pity, with vast distance, and with secret relief that it wasn't them. Every single second I stayed quiet, his sick plan worked perfectly. George's twisted version became the gospel truth by default. The worried, loving father, the tragically unstable daughter, the devoted family just trying to save her from herself. I had spent my entire 34 years being quiet, being easily manageable, being the reliable one who simply absorbs the blows, painfully adjusts her life, and makes absolutely no trouble for anyone else. That was the exact weak version of me they had confidently built this entire trap around. But that girl died in the dark when they touched Layla's name, and what I was about to pull out of my bag was going to shatter George Prescott's perfect life into 1,000 unfixable pieces. I slowly stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I had learned the hard way that the quietest person in a screaming room is usually the one holding the actual truth. I reached deep into my leather bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I set it down dead center on the wooden table. The heavy, flat smack of the cardboard hitting the surface acted like a physical shockwave. The room instantly went completely still. Not silent, you could still hear the cheap coffee maker gurgling angrily in the corner, the soft scratching of Layla's green crayon on paper, and the nervous creak of a metal folding chair. But every single human voice stopped dead. I didn't pause. I didn't let them catch their breath. I fired the undeniable facts like silver bullets. "I'm genuinely glad everyone is here today," I started, my voice steady, ringing clear in the tight space. "Because there are a few important things this trusted community should finally know." I opened the heavy folder and pulled out the first document, holding it high so the overhead lights caught the official Gold County seal. "This house, the exact house my parents and sister currently live in, is mine, sole owner. My grandmother Hazel legally left it to me 14 years ago. This is the deed." I slapped it flat onto the table. My name, only my name. George's mouth fell open, his jaw unhinged, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. "My father, my mother, and my adult sister have lived in my house completely rent-free for 14 straight years." I continued, staring fiercely into the crowd. "I never asked them for a single dollar." I pulled the next page, smacked it down. My official credit report. All 3 bureaus, highlighted in bright yellow so you can't miss where the fraudulent accounts appear. 3 maximum limit credit cards were secretly opened in my name without my knowledge or consent. Total stolen debt, $53,000. Gasps echoed from the back row. I didn't stop, pushed through the local bank internally by a man named Marcus Vance. Does anyone in this room know Marcus? He plays poker with my dad on Friday nights. I set down the scanned bank applications right beside the glaring report. The signatures on these forged applications are my father's exact handwriting. A bizarre sound moved through the stunned room. It wasn't just a gasp, it was the collective sharp inhale of 30 people violently recalculating everything they thought they knew about the man sitting in the center circle. The devoted patriarch illusion was shattering in real time. George shot up from his chair, his face flushing dark purple. That's a disgusting lie. The bank already confirmed it," I shot back smoothly. "I didn't guess, I brought receipts. I have an active federal case number from the CFPB and a criminal police report currently on file with the Riverdale Police Department." Before he could even attempt to recover, I reached into the folder one last time. I pulled this paper out fast. My voice finally shook, vibrating with a mother's raw, terrifying fury. "And 8 months ago, someone used a stolen social security number to open a credit card in the name of my 8-year-old daughter. $1,500. Gloria Mathis's trembling hand flew up to cover her mouth. A muffled sob escaped her. Pastor Timothy turned his head slowly, staring at George like he was looking at a total stranger. The atmosphere in the room violently shifted. I could feel it pressing against my skin like the heavy air pressure dropping right before a massive storm hits. People who had been leaning sympathetically toward George were sitting bolt upright now. Kathy Dietrich physically pulled her hand away from Pamela's like she had been burned by fire. I wasn't done, but that's not all my father has been busy doing. I forced my tone back to level. No tremor, no rage, just cold, hard facts. Exactly 3 weeks after my last hospital stay, he filed a legal petition at the county courthouse to have me declared permanently incompetent. I set the printed copy of the public court docket on the table. My attorney pulled this. If this evil petition went through, my father would become my total legal guardian. He would control every cent of my finances. I locked my eyes directly onto George's panicked face. He could easily sell my house, the house he does not own, to secretly pay off the massive debts he illegally took out in my name. and to quietly fund the $100,000 home equity loan he is desperately trying to close by this Friday. George's face drained from deep purple to a sickly ashen gray. His knuckles turned stark white as he gripped the back of his chair to keep from falling over. "You're twisting everything. I was trying to protect you." "You were trying to protect yourself," I fired back. Pamela stood halfway up, her crumpled tissue pressed desperately to her face. "Diana, please, not in front of everyone." "You chose here, Mom," I reminded her coldly. "Dad invited 30 people to watch me break, so let them hear it all." I turned my heavy gaze to Daphne. She hadn't moved an inch. Her arms were crossed so tightly across her chest that her manicured fingers were turning purple. "And my sister signed this terrifying petition as his star witness, stating under legal oath that I was mentally unfit." I held the crisp white page up high so the entire room could clearly see her messy signature. "Tell them, Daph. Tell your church friends exactly how much Dad promised you from the sale of my house." Daphne's mouth worked furiously, but absolutely no sound came out. She looked pleadingly at George. He completely ignored her, staring a hole into the floor. To my immediate right, a heavy chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. Thomas Benson, the exact man who had boldly claimed I needed someone looking out for me just 10 minutes ago, picked up his folding chair, carried it 3 rows back, and sat down as far away from the Prescott family as possible without saying a single word. The heavy, suffocating silence that immediately followed was the absolute loudest sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Pastor Timothy Abbott slowly rose to his feet. He was a tall, imposing man, lean and serious, pushing his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose. He had lovingly led this specific congregation for 20 years. People trusted him with their souls. George had heavily counted on that blind trust. It was his fatal miscalculation. "George," Timothy's voice was eerily calm, but it carried the crushing moral weight of the entire room. "I agreed to be here today because you specifically told me Diana was in a severe crisis. You told me she was a dangerous threat to herself." George started to panic. "She is. Look at her. I am looking at a brave woman who brought undeniable documentation," Timothy continued, his booming voice cutting over George as if the man hadn't even spoken. "Who spoke calmly, who has not raised her voice a single time." He turned his body to face George fully, blocking him out. "And I am looking at a father who heartlessly stole his own daughter's identity, and his innocent granddaughter's." He addressed the completely stunned room. "I firmly believe we all owe Diana a profound apology for being brought here under such wicked, false pretenses." Gloria Mathis spoke up next. Her voice was thick with tears and absolute disgust. "George Prescott, I have known you for 35 years. Shame on you to your core." Pamela was openly weeping now, not the rehearsed, delicate sobs from earlier. The ugly, real kind, the desperate kind of crying that only comes when the blind audience you spent your whole miserable life performing for finally sees the ugly truth backstage. George's voice violently cracked for the first time in my entire memory. "You people don't understand. I was going to pay it all back. I had a foolproof plan. Your grand plan was to sell my house," I stated flatly. He had absolutely nothing left to say. He just stood there, 62 years old, drowning in his perfectly pressed Sunday shirt, standing in a church where everyone had respectfully called him by his first name for 3 decades. And he had absolutely nothing. But his public humiliation wasn't the finale. I still had 3 white envelopes resting in the bottom of my bag, and what was inside them was about to permanently sever my ties to these people forever. But my heart was still beating a steady, relentless drum against my ribs because I wasn't quite finished. There was one final piece of business I hadn't shared with the congregation yet. One last truth to set free. I reached my shaking hand deep into my leather bag one more time. I pulled out a crisp, official document and slapped the real estate listing agreement right on top of the messy pile of evidence. As of this very morning, my property is officially listed for sale. A shocked rustle swept through the folding chairs like a sudden gust of wind. Someone in the back row whispered a harsh comment I couldn't quite catch, but the tone was crystal clear. George's heavy head snapped up so fast his neck popped. His eyes were wide with genuine terror. "You can't do that to us, Diana. We live there. You live in my home completely without a lease, and without paying a single penny in rent," I corrected him smoothly. I pulled 3 pristine white envelopes from the very back of the manila folder. I slid them across the long table. One stopped directly in front of George's trembling hands. One rested in front of Pamela's crumpled tissues. The final one sat squarely in front of Daphne. She had gone completely rigid, paralyzed by the reality of the moment. My attorney has carefully prepared a formal, 45-day written notice of eviction for all three of you. That is actually significantly more time than Oregon state law requires me to give." George stared down at the blank envelope like it was a ticking bomb about to detonate in his lap. "Where are we supposed to go?" he asked, his voice suddenly sounding incredibly small and weak. I let his pathetic question hang heavy in the stale church air for a long moment. I desperately wanted every single person in that silent room to hear his helpless tone. "That is the very first time in 14 long years you have actually had to answer that question for yourself," I replied softly. "I have been answering it for you my entire adult life." Pamela wildly clutched George's stiff arm, her makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "Diana, please, you can't throw your own flesh and blood out on the cold street." "I'm not throwing you anywhere, Mom. I am legally giving you 45 days to figure it out." I kept my voice perfectly level, which honestly is far more basic courtesy than you gave me when you tried to have me locked away and stripped of my human rights. Daphne violently shoved her chair back. It tipped backward and clattered loudly against the hard linoleum floor. She snatched her expensive purse, stomping fiercely toward the heavy exit doors. Just as she pushed them open, she muttered, "This is completely insane," loud enough for the front row to hear her bitter exit. The thick wooden door slammed firmly shut behind her. Not a single person got up to follow her out. I shifted my gaze back to George. He was still gripping the terrifying envelope, his thick fingers shaking uncontrollably. Pamela was pressing her face deeply into his shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably into his shirt. I simply closed my empty folder. I didn't pause to gloat or demand an apology I knew I would never get. I methodically packed my leather bag. The brutal war was finally over, and I had somehow survived. I turned to face Pastor Timothy one last time. "Thank you for your time today, Pastor." He met my tired eyes directly. There was absolutely no pity left in his kind face. Just deep, quiet respect and a profound sorrow for the immense betrayal that had forced us all into this room. "Diana," he promised softly, "if you or little Layla ever need anything, this church stands firmly behind you." I gave him a small, grateful nod. I looked gently down at Layla. She had proudly finished her bright coloring page. A lovely purple house, a giant yellow sun, and tall green flowers. She held the waxy paper up to show me, blissfully oblivious to the massive adult earthquake that had just violently shattered our family directly above her head. "Ready to go, baby?" I whispered. "Can I bring the new crayons, Mama?" she asked sweetly. "You can bring all the crayons you want." I took her tiny warm hand in mine and we walked steadily toward the exit. Gloria Mathis was waiting faithfully near the main door. As we passed, she reached out and took my free hand gently between both of hers. Her aged fingers were remarkably thin but wonderfully warm. "Your grandmother Hazel would be so incredibly proud of the strong woman you are today, sweetheart," she whispered fiercely. A sudden, sharp lump formed in my tight throat. That was the very first time my composure nearly cracked all day. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Mathis." Stepping outside felt like finally breathing pure oxygen after being trapped underwater. The crisp November sun was hanging low in the sky, casting a beautiful warm gold light over the quiet town. The loose gravel crunched satisfyingly under our shoes with every single step. Layla happily skipped ahead toward our parked car, her beloved coloring book tucked safely under her arm. "Mama, why was Grandpa acting so upset?" she asked innocently. I unlocked the car and gently opened her heavy door. "Because our lives are going to be very different from now on, baby. But different can be a really wonderful thing." She paused, considering my words with the intense, adorable seriousness that only an 8-year-old can naturally manage. Then, she simply nodded, climbed into her seat, and safely buckled herself in. I slid into the driver's seat, started the reliable engine, and slowly pulled out of the church parking lot. I rolled down my frosty window, eagerly letting the freezing winter wind whip across my tired face. For the first time in what felt like decades, my lungs filled completely. I was free. My phone buzzed loudly in the cup holder. A text message glowed from an unknown local number. "Diana, this is Thomas Benson. I owe you a massive apology. I had absolutely no idea what they were doing to you behind closed doors. If you ever need a solid reference for a job, an apartment, anything at all, you call me." I placed the phone gently face down and just drove. I want to pause the story again for just a brief moment because I know this specific part hits very differently depending on where you sit in life. If you have ever been forced to hand a legal eviction notice to your own parents, or even just imagine the crushing guilt of what that would truly feel like, you understand the immense, terrible weight of it. I certainly didn't enjoy doing it. I didn't plan some evil dramatic speech to hurt them. I simply chose to stop absorbing the heavy pain that was never mine to carry in the first place. Let me tell you exactly what happened after that unforgettable Sunday. 2 weeks later, my reality shifted rapidly, but it moved cleanly through proper legal channels, not through toxic family chaos. Megan called me eagerly on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The county judge had officially reviewed her thick motion to completely dismiss the ridiculous guardianship petition. He had carefully examined the confirmed identity theft reports, the federal CFPB case numbers, and Dr. Reed's strong medical letter proving my full cognitive health. He also saw the undeniable financial motive George had for desperately wanting control of my bank accounts. The evil petition was instantly thrown out of court without even needing a formal hearing. The wise judge even added a sharp, permanent note to the official file. Petitioner appears to have a highly significant, dangerous conflict of interest. That exact same week, Officer Hayes from the local police department called to proudly confirm my criminal investigation was fully active. George had been officially summoned for a very serious, recorded interview at the station. Panicking, he quickly hired the exact same cheap lawyer who had blindly helped him file the bogus guardianship papers. However, once that attorney actually reviewed the mountain of undeniable evidence Megan had expertly compiled, he legally withdrew from George's case within 72 hours. He didn't want to touch it. Shortly after, Marcus Vance, George's shady poker buddy, was formally indicted on massive federal bank fraud charges. The massive fraudulent credit accounts dragging down my name were instantly frozen solid by all 3 national bureaus. The messy dispute process would easily take a few tedious months to resolve, but Richard Barnes at the bank personally promised that I would never be held liable for a single penny of the stolen $53,000. Even better, the terrible account opened under my sweet Layla's name was permanently destroyed immediately. Her precious credit file was wiped completely clean, safe from their greedy hands. George desperately tried calling me one final time on a rainy Wednesday evening. His tone was drastically different now, completely stripped of his fake authority, his proud posture, and his carefully practiced calm. He genuinely sounded like a terrified man teetering blindly on the dark edge of a cliff he couldn't talk his way out of. "Diana, I'm begging you, please. I am going to federal jail. I'm your father?" I was standing peacefully in my kitchen, calmly washing Layla's favorite dinner plate. I pressed the warm phone against my ear and simply watched the white soap bubbles slide softly off the smooth ceramic surface. "You really should have thought about the terrible consequences before you chose to steal from your own innocent granddaughter." I hung up the phone. I quietly finished washing the dishes. I dried my clean hands on a fresh towel. Then, I permanently deleted his contact from my life. The painful social fallout in a tight-knit small town never arrives all at once. It slowly seeps in, exactly like freezing water finding hidden cracks in a weak foundation. Pamela stubbornly tried to attend her beloved Wednesday prayer group the very next week, acting like nothing had changed. Gloria Mathis told me the sad details later, speaking gently like she was simply reporting the morning weather. "Your mother proudly walked in and took her usual seat," Gloria shared softly. "Nobody said a mean word, but absolutely nobody sat next to her either. The crushing isolation was too much." Pamela fled the building before the pastor even began the opening prayer. It wasn't active cruelty from the church members. It was actually something much quieter and infinitely worse. It was the heavy, judging silence of good people who simply didn't know what to say to a selfish mother who had eagerly watched her husband steal her daughter's life, and actively chosen to look the other way. Daphne quickly deleted her cruel drama queen photo, but it was far too late. My saved screenshots had already circulated rapidly through the busy Riverdale grapevine. Hushed text chains, shocked group messages, and the quiet, buzzing machinery of a small community actively processing a massive, juicy scandal. A bold co-worker at the local convenience store where Daphne worked part-time finally cornered her behind the register and asked her directly, "So, did your dad really open fake credit cards using your 8-year-old niece's identity?" The public shame was finally too hot for her to handle, but the ultimate fallout was about to hit them where it truly hurt the most, forcing them to pack their bags and face the real world. Pamela called me exactly once. I answered the phone only because I assumed it was about logistics. Moving boxes, returning keys, shutting off the water. "You've completely destroyed this family," she sobbed bitterly into the receiver. I was standing quietly in my bedroom, folding Layla's clean laundry, small cotton shirts, tiny pink socks. I looked down at the neat, peaceful piles. "No, I didn't break us. I just finally stopped letting you break me." "No, Mom," I replied, my voice incredibly hollow and steady. You watched it happen, and you actively chose the wrong side. She hung up. We never spoke again. George and Pamela vacated 514 Meadow Lane on day 28, a full 8 days ahead of the legal deadline. They rented a cramped, single-wide trailer in Milton, the next town over. I didn't go to see them pack. I was busy working my nursing shift, saving lives instead of ruining them. Daphne had already fled after 2 weeks, packing her expensive bags to crash on a friend's couch in Cleveland. I walked through the totally empty house that same evening. 14 years of their living, breathing, and taking, all reduced to absolutely nothing. I saw faded square patches on the walls where their pictures used to hang. Deep, heavy dents in the carpet where George's recliner had permanently sat. The stale kitchen still vaguely smelled like Pamela's bitter dark roast coffee. I grabbed a thick black trash bag and threw out the glass coffee pot she had intentionally left behind. I scrubbed the living room carpet until my knuckles ached. I am scrubbing them away. I am washing the walls clean. I finally reclaimed my own space. The property sold in just 8 weeks. A sweet young couple from Detroit, excited first-time buyers who immediately fell in love with the wide backyard and the wrapping front porch. They enthusiastically offered $188,000, and I gladly accepted, after clearing closing costs, the realtor's commission, and Megan's incredibly earned legal fees. I walked away with just under $160,000. It wasn't lottery money, but it was far more absolute freedom than I'd ever held in my hands. I used the funds surgically. First, I wiped out my crushing hospital bills in one single payment. Gone. Next, I put down a solid deposit on a bright 2-bedroom apartment in Griffin City. It was safely close to Megan's law office and sitting right inside the boundary of a wonderful elementary school district for Layla, 40 minutes away from Riverdale. But the air out here felt entirely different. It tasted like hope. Finally, I confidently walked into a new bank and opened a massive 529 education savings account, a real one, in Layla's true name, for her bright future. With only my signature legally binding it, Layla bravely started her new school on a crisp Monday morning. She wore her favorite purple backpack and squeezed my hand tightly as we crossed the unfamiliar parking lot. That afternoon, she came home and slowly walked around our new apartment. The kitchen was noticeably smaller. The hallway was narrow. Her bedroom was barely big enough to hold a twin bed and a short bookshelf. "This apartment is a lot smaller, Mama," she observed quietly. I knelt down to her eye level. "I know, sweetie, but it's actually ours." Her bright eyes widened. "Really?" She processed that magical concept for a brief second. Then, without another word, she scurried into her tiny room and happily started taping her colorful drawings to the blank walls. "This is home." I officially transferred to the regular day shift at the main hospital in Griffin City. The hourly pay was slightly less, but the reward was immeasurable. I actually slept completely through the night. I ate warm dinners sitting across from my beautiful daughter. I stood quietly and watched the brilliant orange sun go down from a window that belonged to absolutely no one else but me. 2 weeks after we unpacked the last cardboard box, a mysterious letter arrived in the mail. No printed return address. Inside the envelope, I found a crisp $100 gift card to Walmart and a handwritten note pressed onto pale blue stationery. Hazel told me once, "That girl will surely know when it is finally time to stand up." She was so right. It was signed simply, Gloria. I read the delicate cursive twice. A warm tear slipped down my cheek. Then I folded it and tucked it safely into the small drawer beside my bed, where I only keep the things that truly matter. 4 months later, the entire world looked beautifully different from the inside out. George eventually accepted a miserable plea deal. The aggressive district attorney charged him with 1 severe count of identity theft, a major felony under Oregon law, especially given the high dollar amount and the disgusting fact that one innocent victim was a minor child. His cheap attorney aggressively negotiated it down: 3 years of strict probation, mandatory financial counseling, and full financial restitution. Though realistically, with George's non-existent income, paying it back would take him multiple decades. He also earned a permanent criminal record. He didn't serve time in a prison cell. He was 62, a first-time legal offender, and the DA's busy office had much bigger fish to fry. But that dark record shadowed him everywhere. When he confidently applied for a basic, part-time maintenance job at a rundown motel in Milton, management ran a standard background check. He didn't get the job. He eventually found exhausting physical work stocking heavy bags of feed at a dusty farm supply store 25 miles away. Pamela stayed right beside him. I wasn't genuinely surprised. She had stubbornly chosen that sinking ship a long time ago. I heard through the faithful Gloria grapevine that Pamela told the women at her new church that I had suffered a tragic mental breakdown and violently turned on my loving family. Some gullible people believed her sad story, some definitely didn't. Honestly, it didn't matter to me anymore. Their opinions were ghosts. Daphne never called to apologize. I never reached out to Daphne. There was absolutely no tearful, cinematic reconciliation, no dramatic scene sitting at a cozy coffee shop where we hugged, cried, and promised to do much better. Sometimes that is exactly how real trauma ends. Not with a loud crashing door slamming shut, but with a quiet door that simply stays closed forever. I didn't hate them, none of them. Carrying pure hate requires a massive amount of burning energy that I would much rather spend elsewhere, on Layla's evening homework, on my recovering patients, on the small thriving garden I started out on our little apartment balcony. Plump cherry tomatoes and fragrant green basil. Layla happily watered them from a yellow plastic can every single morning before the yellow school bus arrived. I completely let them go. That is the most honest, truest thing I can possibly say. I physically set down their heavy baggage, and my tired arms finally remembered what it actually feels like to be wonderfully empty and totally free. I want to share what I learned from surviving this nightmare, not as preachy advice, just as what happened to my soul. I learned that the toxic people who love to call you dramatic are usually the exact ones doing the most horrific damage, because if they can successfully manipulate you into doubting your own totally normal reaction, they never have to actually answer for their terrible actions. Every single time I got physically sick, every time I was bone-tired, every time I asked a basic question, dramatic. It is a cruel weapon designed specifically to make you shrink, and I wasted years letting that weapon work. I learned that owning a piece of paper means absolutely nothing if you refuse to aggressively protect it. My grandmother lovingly handed me those brass keys, but I foolishly handed them right over to wolves. I let ungrateful people live inside rent-free. I let them aggressively rearrange the furniture. I let them confidently call it the family house, until I almost brainwashed myself into believing it too. Generosity without firm boundaries isn't real generosity at all. It's just leaving your front door wide open with no lock. I learned that regularly checking your personal credit report and your innocent child's is not paranoid behavior. It's not being dramatic, it is basic parenting. If I had boldly looked 4 years earlier, I would have instantly caught the very first fake card. If I had checked 8 months earlier, Layla's spotless name would never have been violated. I check our numbers every single quarter now. It takes exactly 15 minutes. And I learned that the word family does not give anyone a magical free pass to steal from your wallet, lie about your sanity, or desperately try to take away your freedom. Shared blood is not a legally binding contract. True love is not a demanding lease. And the very people who loudly weaponize the word family to keep you quiet are usually the ones hiding the darkest, ugliest secrets. Setting a hard boundary is not petty revenge. It is the absolute first step toward finding your peace. Layla looked up at me last week and softly asked if she would ever see Grandpa again. I chose to tell her the simple truth. I honestly don't know, baby, but I do know that you are completely safe. She slowly nodded, picked up her favorite crayon, and went right back to drawing. That was more than enough. It's a peaceful Thursday evening right now. The warm apartment is beautifully quiet. Layla sits happily at the small kitchen table, bent deeply over a crisp sheet of white paper with her colorful crayons spread around her like a tiny, messy artist's studio. I am standing peacefully at the sink, washing the very last of our dinner plates. The small window directly above the running faucet looks out over the asphalt parking lot, and just beyond it, a beautiful row of tall maple trees are just starting to turn bright autumn orange. Mama, look! I dry my wet hands and walk over to her chair. She proudly holds up the finished drawing. 2 smiling people standing proudly in front of a small, cozy house. The taller figure has wavy brown hair and is beaming. The shorter figure is holding the taller one's hand tightly. There are bright flowers growing in the front yard, red and purple, and a massive yellow sun shines in the top corner, its warm rays extending all the way to the very edges of the page. That's us, Mama. It sure is, I whisper, kissing the top of her head. She eagerly goes back to adding more details. A fluffy cat, apparently. We don't actually own a cat, but in Layla's perfect little world, we do, and that is completely fine. I walk back to the stainless steel sink. The clean water runs delightfully warm over my healing hands. My wise grandmother Hazel used to say something incredibly profound. She would casually say it while she was outside hanging wet laundry, or peacefully shelling green peas, or doing the 100 small, invisible things that silently held a house together. She'd look at me and say, "A house is just made of wood and walls, Diana. Home is exactly who you choose to protect inside them." I wasted 14 exhausting years protecting the absolute wrong people inside the wrong walls. I made endless, pathetic excuses for selfish people who wouldn't even make a tiny inch of room for me. I foolishly called it love. I called it duty. I called it family. Now I simply have 2 small rooms, a brilliant daughter who draws beautiful pictures of our safe life, and a strong front door that I lock securely every single night. Not because I am afraid of the outside world anymore, but because, for the very first time in my entire existence, what is locked inside is truly, entirely mine. My father arrogantly asked a crowded church fellowship hall in front of 30 staring people, "Who's the dramatic one now?" I didn't bother to answer his cruel question back then, but I will gladly answer it right now. No one. Because I absolutely refuse to live as a tragic supporting character in his toxic story anymore. I am finally the author of my own. Stories like this serve as a powerful reminder that truth eventually finds its way to the light, no matter how deep the betrayal. If Diana's journey toward reclaiming her voice and her daughter's future touched you today, I invite you to join our community. Your support, a simple like on this video, and hitting that subscribe button helps ensure these stories of resilience continue to reach those who need to hear them most. Let's stay connected. I look forward to sharing more of these deep, unfiltered human experiences with you in the next one.